All right, so continuing on with 6.2, we're actually going to skip the top problem on the back. We don't have to worry about that one. Okay, so we're just going to move down to these where it says finding data values giving specific probabilities. These are usually the hardest things for people to remember how to do in Chapter 6. Hopefully when you do the homework, it will be easy because you have your notes right there, but when it comes to the test, this is usually the thing that people forget how to do the most. So you'll want to pay close attention to this. So instead of calculating the z-score and looking up the percent, we're going to have to work backwards. They're going to give us a percent. So this first one, to qualify for a police academy, candidates must score in the top 10% on a general abilities test. The test has a mean of 200 and standard deviation of 20. Find the lowest possible score in order to qualify. So what I do for these is I draw my picture first. All right, so when I draw this, there's my normal thing. You kind of have to think about this. Oops, sorry. You kind of have to think about this. We want the top 10%. So that means you're going to be over here. This part in here needs to be 0.1. We get so used to putting their numbers down here, but this is not a z-score. 0.1 is not a z-score. This is 10% underneath the curve. Okay, it is not a z-score. So when they give you a percent, that represents the underneath part. If it helps you to think of the area, that's also what you're finding. You're finding 10% of the area, or that tail, we like to call it, has 0.1 for area. All right, so there's two ways to do this problem. Again, if you look in the big part of your chart at 0.1, so again, instead of looking along the sides for your z-score, you need to look in the big part of your chart for 0.1, or the number that's closest to 0.1. All right, hopefully you see here we have 0.1003. That's going to be the closest to 0.1. Okay, 0.1003. So that has a z-score of negative 1.28. Now you should see from your picture there's no way that z-score can be negative 1.28. That's because when you look up 0.1, you're actually finding this tail over here instead of this tail. But remember, these are symmetrical, so since this was negative 1.28, that means this z-score is positive 1.28. Okay, so z is positive 1.28. That's the shortcut. The other thing you would have to do if you want to do it another way is realize that this way is 0.9. So you need to look up 0.9 in the big part of your table, and then you'll find 1.28. All right, most people just look up this number and then realize whether it should be a positive or a negative. Okay, that's not it though. We need to find an actual test score rather than a z-score. So what you have to do is you have to use your z-score formula. So remember that formula is z equals x minus mu over sigma. So normally we know what x, mu, and sigma are. This time we know what z, mu, and sigma are. So you're going to have to set up an equation and actually solve it algebraically. So you would have 1.28, that's your z-score, equals x minus your mean, which is 200, over your standard deviation, which is 20. Okay, so you're going to have to set up that equation. So these take a lot more work. Okay, first remembering how to set it up, looking in the big part of your chart in order to find your z-score, and then setting it up, and then doing algebra. So in order to solve this for x, the first thing we're going to do is times by 20. That will get rid of that, times by 20, and then we would add 200. The nice part about these is that's always going to be the same. Okay, no matter what your numbers are, you're going to take your z-score times your standard deviation to get rid of that, and then add your mean, whatever it is. So 1.28 times 20 plus 200 gives you 225.6. So the lowest score to qualify would be a 226 for your final answer. All right, next one. For a medical study, a researcher wishes to select people in the middle 60% of the population based on blood pressure. Okay, so again, before I even get to the numbers, we want the middle 60%. This always gets a little bit tricky. So that's the picture you would draw. Middle 60% looks like that. You can't look up 0.6 on your chart. That won't tell you, okay? When you look at the top of your chart, the pictures don't look like this, okay? You can only find areas to the left. So what you have to do is you got to figure out what this area right here is, okay? So since this is 0.6, 60%, that means there's 40% left, which means there's 20% left on each side. This is symmetric, remember. So you have 60% in the middle, meaning 40% left overall, which means this is going to be 0.2 and this is going to be 0.2 also. Okay, so you can look up 0.2 or you could look up 0.8 if you wanted to go over all the way over that way, but most people look up 0.2. So again, you're looking in the big part of your chart for 0.2 and you should find negative 0.84. So that's negative 0.84, and since it's symmetric, it means that one has to be 0.84. So the nice thing is you don't have to find two totally different ones. They're just opposites. Okay, you do have to do two totally different equations though. Okay, some people think you can just do one of them and then make it opposite for the next one, but that doesn't work. So what you're going to do is set up negative 0.84 equals x minus 120 all over 8, and then you're going to have to do positive 0.84 equals x minus 120 all over 8. Okay, so again, times by 8, that gets rid of that, and then plus 120. Times by 8 plus 120. All right, so after you round, this one should give you 113.3, and that one should give you 126.7. So again, we just like to round to the nearest whole number for this. So we're going to be between 113 and 127 would be your upper and lower readings for those. Okay, that's it for 6.2. So again, the only difference between 6.1 and 6.2 is adding the actual data values with it. So calculating your z-score in the first video, and then this one you have to draw your picture, look in your chart in order to find your z-score, set up your equation, and solve.